Congratulations to everyone here at the Wyoming State Destination Imagination Competition. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you tonight. Before I get started, I wanted to say a big thank you to the State Board of Destination Imagination, the event organizers, the parents, both mine and yours, and everyone who worked to make this weekend's events possible. Finally, a big thank you to Mrs. Holly Hoffman. Mrs. Hoffman was my DI coach, and as she was back then, she continues to be one of the most capable people I've ever known. She taught me a lot, and I hope that you all get the chance to meet her and talk to her. Now it's time to discuss our first topic for the evening, murder on the high seas. In England, two prisoners, Thomas Dudley and Edwin Stevens, were brought before the court of Chief Justice Lord Coleridge for the willful murder of Richard Parker on July 25, 1884, on the high seas. The facts are as follows. On July 5, 1884, the prisoners, Dudley and Stevens, with another man named Brooks, were at sea serving as the crew of an English ship. Richard Parker, an 18-year-old boy and fellow sailor, was also on board. One night, the ship was cast away in a storm on the high seas and thrown 1,600 miles from the Cape of Good Hope. Dudley, Stevens, Brooks, and Richard Parker were forced to abandon ship and get into a lifeboat. On the lifeboat, they had no supply of water and no supply of food, and for 19 days the men suffered. Richard Parker drank seawater and became very ill. On the day of July 25th, Dudley and Stevens could take it no more. They decided to sacrifice Richard so that they could live. Dudley offered a prayer, and then, with the consent of Stevens, he killed Richard Parker then and there. Stevens, Dudley, and Brooks fed upon the boy for 4 days. On the 5th day, the prisoners were rescued by a passing ship. They were returned to England for trial. The question before the judge was whether the killing of Richard Parker by Dudley and Stevens was murder or not. How should Judge Coleridge start to answer a question like that? Should he be sympathetic because of their ordeal? On the other hand, Lord Coleridge is a judge. He is bound to serve the law, which says that murder is illegal. Should it matter that the men had no choice but to die? Does it seem fair? Why do we feel ever so slightly sympathetic towards these two wretched men? Courses at law school teach law by using real-world cases to illustrate legal principles. But some cases raise bigger questions. These questions ask what we fundamentally value as a society. The answers reached by the law, and how we feel about them, give us clues about ourselves and the world we live in. I have a few more stories to share with you. While the result reached in each case is often interesting in itself, I encourage you to go beyond the case. Think about the underlying reasons for the court's decision. Decide if you agree with them. Someday, it may be your decision. This case involves a man named Mr. Hawkins and a surgeon named Dr. McGee. As a child, Mr. Hawkins injured the tissue of his hand by electrical shock. As he grew, the scar tissue affected the development of his hand, resulting in a serious disability. Dr. McGee agreed to perform a procedure on Mr. Hawkins to graft skin from his chest onto his hand to make it a 100% good hand. Dr. McGee did the surgery, but because the skin was from Hawkins' chest, it caused his palm to grow a thick mat of hair. Hawkins sued McGee for breaking his promise. The court agreed that McGee had not delivered on his promise to make a 100% good hand. But they had a problem. How much money should McGee owe Hawkins? How should the court measure the value of the hairy hand against the value of an injured hand? Ultimately, the court said that Dr. McGee owed Mr. Hawkins the value of the difference between a perfect hand and the hairy hand. By doing so, the court makes a comment on what we, as a society, expect out of a deal, and how we value both our word and our hands. Consider what McGee probably should have promised about the procedure. Consider how other people may interpret the promises you make, and what expectations they may attach to them. Keep your word. The last case is about an accident. If someone accidentally hurts someone else, what can the injured person do about it? How do we justify blaming someone? This case comes from New York in 1928.
Here's what happened. One day, Helen Palsgraf went to the railroad station and purchased a ticket to Rockaway Beach. She went and stood on the railroad platform beneath a big set of heavy metal scales. Another train in the station began to leave, and as it was pulling away, a man carrying a package ran out to catch the last car. As the man jumped on, he dropped the package onto the tracks. Even though the package looked harmless, it was in fact filled with fireworks. It exploded, and the shock caused the scales above Helen's head to fall. Helen was injured and sued the railroad. The judge had to decide whether it was fair to make the railroad pay Helen Palsgraf. In this case, it doesn't really seem like the falling scales were the railroad's fault. They didn't know about the explosion. If they had, they probably would have taken precautions. This chain of events was so unlikely that Helen's injury was truly an accident and not the railroad's fault. But if you really get this case, then you'll see the bigger picture question. How much of an accident does a situation have to be before nobody is held responsible? Do you think that drunk drivers are accidents like in the Palsgraf case? Start thinking about how broad the consequences of your actions can be. Do your best to stay out of trouble, because trouble is closer than you think.
Maybe some of you are still wondering about what happened to Dudley and Stevens, the sailors turned murderers from the first story I told you. The court sentenced the men to death, but they were pardoned. They served 6 months in prison and were released. Both were haunted by what they had done. Stevens lost his mind. Dudley moved to Australia and died of the plague. The important thing is that you were wondering about them. Imagination and creativity are skills I, like you, fostered in DI. I used the same out-of-the-box thinking at law school as I used for instant challenges. I hope you wonder about everything, read all the time, and argue about these stories on the bus ride home. And I hope you all come back next year. My best to all of you. Good night.